Welcome to Wildcat Science with Mrs. Haugo. This is human biology, psychology, and we are in part 5 talking about psychology, the brain, love, sex, and relationships. In part 4, we talked about the 3 stages of love: lust, attraction, attachment, and the neurotransmitters involved: testosterone, estrogen, dopamine, norepinephrine, adrenaline, cortisol, any of those stress hormones, serotonin, oxytocin, and vasopressin. We also talked about the chemical aspect of love and what's going on in your brain, and that your hypothalamus is very involved. So let's talk about love is its own reward in the stage of attraction. So dopamine, which is produced by the hypothalamus, is known as the reward pathway, and things like spending time with a loved one or physical intimacy gets that reward pathway going, and you get another shot of dopamine. Also, norepinephrine and adrenaline and cortisol are released at this time. These chemicals make one giddy, energetic, euphoric, leading to increased appetite and even insomnia, which means you actually can be so in love that you can't eat or sleep. So it is also involved in the fight or flight response, which kicks in high gear when we're stressed. So brain scans of people in love actually have shown that the primary reward centers of the brain, including what's considered the caudate nucleus, fire like crazy when people are shown a photo of someone they are intensely attracted to, compared to when they're shown one that they feel neutral to. And also, talking about serotonin, we know that during the attraction stage, a person has low levels of serotonin, which is also the same as someone who has an obsessive compulsive disorder. And a lot of that has to deal with the infatuation stage, where you just can't stop thinking about them and everything they do is awesome and you just want to know what's going on. Well, the friend zone may not be as sexy as the lust or attraction stage, but it is much more important for a long-term relationship. And this is important for all types of relationships: parent-infant, friends, and anybody else that you have a long-term relationship with. And the two hormones, like we know, are vasopressin and oxytocin. And we know that oxytocin is like a cuddle hormone, and it is released when you snuggle with someone that you like, or even a pet. And it is involved in sex, breastfeeding, and childbirth. And all of these things are involved in bonding. And what about when love hurts? So love makes us feel good, rewarded, and close to romantic partners. But that's not the whole story. Love is often accompanied by jealousy, erratic behavior, and irrationality, along with a whole host of other than less than positive emotions and moods. So dopamine, for instance, is the hormone responsible for the vast majority of the brain's reward pathway, controlling both the good and the bad. We experience surges of dopamine for our virtues and our vices. In fact, the dopamine pathway is particularly well studied when it comes to addiction and addictions of all kinds. So the same region that lights up when we're feeling attracted lights up when drug addicts take cocaine and when we binge sweets. For example, cocaine maintains dopamine signaling for much longer than usual, leading to a temporary high. In a way, attraction is much like an addiction to another human being. Similarly, the same brain regions light up when we become addicted to material goods as when we become emotionally dependent upon our partners. And addicts going into withdrawal are not unlike love-struck people craving the company of someone they cannot see. So looking at this picture, if you have an ideal versus Too much dopamine, oxytocin, starting out with lust, attraction, and attachment are the correct amounts of the hormones that are in balance. Too much with like binge eating or drug abuse, it leads to irrational behavior, and then in relationships, adultery and jealousy. And finally, what would love be without embarrassment? Sexual arousal appears to turn off regions in our brain that regulate critical thinking, self-awareness, and rational behavior, including parts of the prefrontal cortex, which, as we remember, is really important for thinking and planning and abstract behavior. So in short, love makes us dumb. Have you ever done something while you were in love and then you regretted it later? So that is something to think about, as when our brains are in love, they are a little bit similar to being addicted to something or on cocaine. So you'll want to take that into consideration. And also, if people around you are like, I don't know, like, do you remember what he did? That wasn't so hot. Just remember that they're not out to get you, but that their brains aren't on drugs in love like your brain is. So that's something to take into consideration. So we've learned quite a bit about the brain and about neurotransmitters and the 3 stages of love and what's going on in your brain with each of those stages. And I wanted to talk a little bit about the last stage, attachment, and long-term relationships. So a couple of questions I have are, if you have ever thought about having a long-term relationship and or getting married. And if the answer is yes, the next question is, have you ever thought about, if you get married, would you, or in a long-term relationship, would you like to stay married and stay in a committed long-term relationship? And again, a third question is, do you know anybody who was in a long-term relationship and no longer is? So as we know, long-term relationships do break apart, and there is some interesting psychology about which relationships will break up and which ones won't, and things we can do to help that. So let's talk a little bit about the psychologist John Gottman and what he calls the Seattle Love Lab. So there are a lot of ideas of what one should do in a long-term relationship to make it work, and a lot of, let's say, good advice about how you should argue or not argue or use I statements or any of this stuff. Well, John Gottman kind of started from scratch, and he said, well, let's get rid of all of the opinions, and I'm just going to get a bunch of people who are in a relationship and just follow them over a long period of time, like 5, 10, 15, 20 years, and then document the things that they do and see if they stay together, and the things that they don't do and see if they stay together. So after quite a bit of research, he was able to put together about 7 things that if you do these things, your relationship will go downhill. And then we'll talk about those first, and then there are about another 7 things where if you do them, it will help improve a relationship. So this is something that is applicable to a romantic partner now or in the future, and also all non-romantic partners, so friends, parents, and all of that. So what people do, which is unintentional, that hurts their relationships. So the first thing we're going to talk about is using a harsh setup when you're bringing up an issue. So let's talk about a harsh versus a soft setup. I feel like an example would be the best way to explain that. So I'm going to do 2 different scenarios, and you're going to have to figure out which one you think is the harsh setup. Another Saturday, and once again, I'm spending my time picking up after you. The trouble with you is that you are a slob. This house is an incredible mess, and I am having friends over tonight. I am very upset that I'm doing all of the work myself. Please help me, by doing the vacuuming. So my questions are, which one, the first or the second scenario, was the harsh setup? And which one, the first or the second, am I most likely to get what I want from you? Perhaps I want to have some friends over and the house is a mess, and I want you to help with that. So if you said the second one would be more likely that I would get what I wanted, I would get some help from you, that would be right. And if you said the first one was a harsh setup, you are right. So 96% of the time, the tone of the first 3 minutes of an interaction will determine how the interaction ends. So if you want something, you really want to be cognizant. You really want to think about how you start a conversation with someone, even if you're just really mad at them and you want them to know it. Using criticism is a second thing that will over time deteriorate a relationship. And so that doesn't mean everything somebody does, another person does, is wonderful, but there is a big difference between a complaint and a criticism. So a complaint addresses a specific action, and a criticism is more general and it says something negative about the person's personality. Again, there are two scenarios. There is a complaint and a criticism, and you're going to have to pick which one is which. Why are you so forgetful? I hate having to always pick up after you. You just don't care about anything but yourself. I'm really angry that you didn't pick up your practice clothes. We talked about you taking responsibility for your belongings. So which one was the criticism and which one was the complaint? If you said the first one was the criticism and the second one was the complaint, you would be correct. So in the second one, I'm still angry and I am addressing a specific action. So it doesn't mean that everything is wonderful. It just means I don't attack the person like I did in the criticism. The third thing that people do that unintentionally deteriorates or destroys or just kind of like picks away at a relationship over time is using contempt. So contempt involves sarcasm, cynicism, name-calling, eye-rolling, sneering, mockery, and hostile humor. And again, you're going to have to pick out which of the scenarios involves contempt. Why don't you ever wash your clothes? Your jeans are ripped and your boots are dirty. You are a disgusting pig. I'd like you to put on a clean pair of jeans and shoes before we go out. Which one use contempt? If you said the first one, you would be correct. If you notice, there was name calling, you disgusting pig, and there was some like underlying disgust when I was saying that. And this one is more like a specific request. So this is a wide range of things. Anytime somebody uses sarcasm or is being cynical towards their partner, definitely eye rolling, those are all under contempt, and those are not healthy for your relationship. The last one we're going to talk about today is being defensive. And being defensive doesn't get the results. It actually often will escalate the conflict because in a way it's saying, I'm not at fault, you are. Being defensive is a pretty common one. It's a pretty natural reaction. And in part 6, we're going to delve in and look at what would that look like? What are the different ways that being defensive comes out in day-to-day life? Okay, see you then. Bye.